Welcome, everybody, to FashMash's monthly speaker series, where Rachel, Arthur, and I bring together the world's brightest minds dissecting the future of fashion. We founded FashMash 9 years ago, but our business mission remains just as important now as it did back then. That is to encourage dialogue and open sharing of ideas to shape the future of fashion. Tonight, we welcome one of the world's leading voices on the intersection of consumerism and colonialism, Aja Barber. Before I introduce her properly, I just wanted to thank our sponsor, Klaviyo. They are an e-commerce marketing company for brands of all types, shapes, and sizes, from 111 Skin to Hummingbird Bakery to FashMash. If you would like to give them a go for your digital marketing, and we highly recommend that you do, just go to klaviyo.com/FashMash. That's klaviyo.com, klaviyo.com/FashMash, and you can start your free trial. Now, this evening, let's delve right in. This is an industry that is built on uncomfortable truths, and the past year brought that to the fore, or at least it did for most. Newly published author and consultant Aja Barber has been at the forefront of unpacking fashion's misleading claims and outright bad practices. Most importantly, she is unafraid to call bullshit on anyone not willing to recognize the need to transform or actively distracting from that idea in the process. She is an expert on how what we buy is anchored in slavery and racism, not to mention how it's a direct contributor to the climate crisis. Her book, Consumed: The Need for Collective Change, Colonialism, Climate Change, and Consumerism, has been described by Vogue as a blueprint for anyone who wants to do better. It aims to teach us how to be citizens, not consumers. She's also a consultant for sustainability with a special focus on intersectionality and building a fair and equitable landscape. I'm sure many of you have already read Consumed, and if you haven't, you will be compelled to buy it following this evening's interview with Rachel, which I really cannot wait for. Before I welcome them both on the virtual stage, I just wanted to give a shout out to the charity for which we are raising money this evening. Since the pandemic, FashMash has not been charging for tickets, but instead we ask attendees to donate to a charity of the speaker's choice in lieu of, in light of gratitude for their time and expertise. This evening, Aja has chosen Slow Factory. Slow Factory is a non-profit organization focused on advancing climate justice and social equity through regenerative design, open education, and materials innovation. They foster creative, cross-disciplinary collaboration for the systematic transformation we urgently need by 2030. Lots of you have already been so generous this evening. We really appreciate it. We will be leaving the link live on Eventbrite afterwards if you would like to donate further, or if you haven't yet had the opportunity to do so. FashMash also always makes a contribution. And since we started these talks, we have donated to charities, including the Prince's Trust, Shelter, and Southall Black Sisters. Right, almost time to begin. A couple of notices. First of all, do ask questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. We will have an open Q&A session as usual once the interview is wrapped. And then if you would like to just add any comments or chat further, you can do that in the chat box, or of course on social media, we are FashMash, or rather at FashMash, I should say. Handing over to Rachel and Aja, if you could both unmute yourselves and turn on your video. I can't wait to hear what you both have to say.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank
Rachel.
you for that really nice intro. I was like, wow, you're really talking me up.
Of course, of course, of course. Well, listen, first of all, huge thank you for being here. I know you've been doing back-to-back interviews off the back of the launch of your book, so we're incredibly grateful. Hopefully you'll get to say some more things that you are not having to put on repeat for your own sake this evening, but equally our audience is incredibly excited to hear your wisdom firsthand on these topics.
Well, I will say, like, a lot of the stuff I say, even though I do feel like I say a lot of the same stuff, it just needs to be said again and again, because I think the general public is still sort of on the outskirts of this conversation when everyone should be getting in the conversation. And I think the fashion industry has sort of done itself a disservice by not making a lot of information as available as it should be. And that's where social media can be really great, because it can be great for touching on topics that people don't feel very included in. And I like to think what I do well is I take, tricky conversations and sort of, put them in layman's terms so that everyone can feel like they're a part of it. Because we talk about how we need to build this like sustainable, we need a sustainable fashion movement. We need everyone involved, but we can't actually have everyone involved if they don't have the tools to even understand what their involvement looks like.
Yeah, absolutely. And your platforms, all of them, are incredibly educational, and I think that's a really, really good place for us to start. I mean, I'm going to assume that everybody that's here, by virtue of what we've titled this evening, and also the type of audience that we tend to bring in, understands colonialism as a concept.
Mm-hmm.
But to break it down, I'd love to hear from you to start us off, how it applies to the fashion sector today, and how other big aspects, some of the big words that Rosanna mentioned, from oppression, racism,
Mm-hmm.
slavery, injustice, full stop, all tie into fashion in its modern form, today's.
Yeah. So that's a big question, but I'll try and keep it to 5 minutes.
Maybe.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, if we look at like colonialism in general, we look at the material world that we live in and the consumer markets that we live in. Most of consumer goods that we use in the global north, whether it be the UK or the US, where I'm from, generally tend to originate from the global south. And often it's countries that are resource rich, labor rich, economically poor. And I don't think that we've been questioning why it looks that way. We haven't. And that's how we get into this position where people hear about exploitation within the supply chain and go, yeah, but it's a good job for that group of people over there. Like, that's a really good job. Who am I to disagree? They wouldn't have work otherwise. We should actually be questioning that, because the truth of the matter is, if it's a job that you and I wouldn't want to do, then no, we shouldn't be saying it's a good job for anyone. That's the first thing. That's like modern day colonialism, I think. Feeling like those of us in the global north have different rights to safe work, well-paid work, that sort of stuff. That is a very colonialist attitude, and it just appears everywhere in our society. We have to unpick that. But if we're looking at the labor and who is doing the labor, and we look at the materials and who is having their resources from their country basically ripped up to provide for the entire rest of the world, it's still a very unfair system. And if we look at the history of colonialism, and Slow Factory has done me the goods of doing a map inside of my book where we actually show that the trade paths of centuries past are the same trade paths we use today. Not much has changed on that scale. And so at the start of your product is being made and produced by non-white people who are being ripped off. It is being consumed in wealthier countries, which are usually majority white. And then at the end of your product, because we have a linear model within today's fashion, it is getting donated, and eventually it will end up right back in the global south, where it is a ecological disaster in a lot of the places, because the amount of clothing that we have bought in the last 20 years has sped up exponentially. This is something the fashion industry has done while blaming the consumer, saying constantly that they're responding to consumer demand. But I don't remember being like a teenager and being like, you know what? I want 51 seasons of clothing a year. I never stated that. And I was someone who used to purchase and, participate in this cycle. But even I noticed while I was participating that I didn't really feel very good with how much I was feeling pressured to buy new clothing, how often I was buying new clothing. And I really didn't feel good when it came time to like pack up last year's pieces and, you know, things that hadn't held up very well and going, okay, what am I going to do with this? I guess I'll donate it, but I know that I don't want to wear a shirt where the seam has gone completely across my torso. So why would someone in the global South want that? And that's another way our pernicious attitude shows up with colonialism. It's this idea that not good enough for you, but good enough for that person down there, you know? And that's, I remember, and this is a deleted chapter from my book, but I had this roommate when I was in my late 20s, and I was sort of watching the way she was consuming, and I knew that I was consuming differently, but in similar ways. Like we were both buying a lot of stuff, but she was buying way more than me. And she would go through this system where she would go through all these catalogs of cheaply made clothing. She'd order a bunch of it. She'd not wear it because it wasn't good quality, but then she was, you know, a little too, you know, not inspired to send it back. So it would just sort of hang out on the floor of her dirty room. And then after a few months' time, she would collect it, put it in a bag and give it to charity. And it was rinse, lather, repeat every 3 months, basically. And I was not getting rid of clothes at that rate. I would do like a wardrobe clean out once a year. And there was one time when she was participating in this 3-month wardrobe clean out, and she had a pair of broken boots from the 90s. It was like, the boots looked like they were probably circa 1996, 1997. Today, they'd be like shit hot in Peckham. Like someone would be like rocking them. But back then, nobody wanted them. And the heel was completely broken. They were unusable. They were dated, but she still wanted to donate them to a charity. And I said, look, I don't think that a charity can use this. And she was like, no, you just don't understand. People in poor countries in Africa and Asia, they'll use it because the charity will repair it. No, the charity will not repair it. And that they'll give it to someone. They'll be so happy to have it. And I just thought, okay, I'm not going to argue with this fool, but honestly, I don't think she's that unique. I think that's actually the way a lot of people are thinking about this system. And it was in that moment, and this was probably like 2008, 2009. It was in that moment where I realized that she actually had a very common attitude, which meant that if she's doing this, and I don't think she's out of the ordinary, and you've got millions of Americans doing the same thing, this has to be an ecological disaster. In that moment, it was just like, oh no. And then I felt even more terrible about it all. And then I also
doing it guilt-free. Doing it guilt-free.
Oh, I have so much. I constantly have guilt. Like I'm always like, and I always knew.
Oh, for sure, but others don't.
That's no,
she think they're doing good. Right?
She had no guilt whatsoever. No, there was always a part of me that felt a little bit uncomfortable. Like, oh, here's a bag for charity. You know, I knew that it wasn't a good thing. And then one summer I did volunteer in a charity shop, and everything I had suspected was quite confirmed to me, even though I didn't have all the pieces of the puzzle. I would volunteer in there like 2 days a week. I come in, I try and get through all of these bags of clothing donations and get them, you know, sorted, and then the good stuff would go out on the floor. But at the time, I really recognized that like we were only selling about 10%. And the bags, sometimes they'd be almost up to the ceiling. We're talking bin bags full of clothing. And I just was like, oh no. Like it was like all of these things sort of snapping together for me. And I just like, we received so much clothing. We would only take the most pristine items, and anything that was okay-ish would go like to like a less economically advantaged state like West Virginia, which that in its own self is a weird class system. And even then there was so much clothing. And I just thought, okay, we are one of thousands of charity shops in America. This is a bad thing. This is a really, really bad thing. So all of these moments, I started to just feel more and more uneasy with all of these systems. And once I began to sort of do a deep dive into the history of colonialism, I was just like, you know, this is horrible. And then the other ways in which like waste colonialism shows up, and I wrote about this today, recently there was an article in Sourcing Journal about how companies that manufacture in Cambodia that destroy their stock are actually aiding in the deforestation of forest in Cambodia. And when I say waste colonialism, the reason I talk about it that way is because it is outsourcing, your waste problem to someone else. You're leaving the manufacturers to destroy these goods when in actuality you shouldn't be destroying the goods. No one should. And that whole process of destroying the goods, burning the fires, taking from the forest, that ends up being chalked up to, oh, well, that's Cambodia. But in actuality, these are American and European countries that are having these companies that are benefiting from doing this overseas. So the company can say, oh, well, that doesn't happen on our shores, but it sure is happening somewhere else, So there's various ways that colonialism just shows up repeated in the system over and over and over again. And when we look at carbon outsets and net zero and all of that stuff, people will always look to countries that produce goods and go, oh, but what about their carbon footprint? Okay, but who are they producing for? Who is consuming? Who is benefiting from them having that carbon footprint? And we have to ask ourselves these questions, especially when talking about what regulation will look like in the future. If a company can just go overseas and do dirty work, and then the country which they're manufacturing in is tasked with cleaning up the mess, that's not a fair system.
No, indeed. I mean, we're outsourcing all of our production, therefore outsourcing our carbon footprint as well.
Exactly.
Goes hand in hand. One of the examples I really love that you give in the book is also the example of modern day colonialism showing up in Ghana and the greenwashing that's beginning to happen. Maybe you could just explain. I just thought I hadn't thought of it through this lens. I didn't know that this was I knew what was going on in Ghana in terms of the amount of secondhand clothes being dumped there and the market that exists, but I didn't know that piece around the way that the brands are now starting to thinking about stepping back in from a circularity perspective.
Oh yes. So I mean, for a while, certain brands that I don't like have been definitely circling in on Ghana, and it's just another bit of colonialism because they're not going in there thinking we need to give good jobs to the people that are already recycling our waste. They're going in thinking we can take this waste for next to nothing, learn how to recycle it ourselves, have these people that are trash pickers and waste pickers help us. We'll pay them a little bit more than what they're getting paid now, but there's no talk of what restorative justice would look like. It's all profit, 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 money, 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 money. So when you hear your favorite high street brand talking about Ghana, just know they're doing something shady. These are business models that have never lifted anyone out of poverty. They just haven't. And I don't expect to see it happen now.
No, it's interesting. And it's really interesting to think about it through that lens of actually is another example of greenwashing that's being chalked up, as per the example of your friend, to make people feel like they can shop in a guilt-free way, or they can dispose of things in a guilt-free way.
We cannot keep consuming at the rate that we've been consuming at in the last 20 years and expect our planet to go on. That is the problem. And that's what no one within big fashion really wants to address, is that the levels of consumption which bring in the billions of dollars of profit, that needs to stop. That needs to slow down. That needs to probably have itself or do less, but in general, no one wants to acknowledge that pushing consumers to feel like they should buy 68 items of clothing a year, which is what the average fast fashion consumer buys, is actually the biggest part of the problem. It's the biggest pink elephant in the room.
No, it really is. It's massive. And I know you and I have talked about this before. I think what's very interesting is that you've started this conversation very much through the lens of so-called, social side of the issues and the justice side of the issues, understandably, because my question was geared in that way. But your book, even the title of it, Colonialism, Climate Change and Consumerism, brings all of those pieces together. And as you say, our planet cannot survive under the sort of current system that we've got, producing this many items. Could you just help connect the dots a little bit more for people, just in terms of how colonialism, the consumerism that you've explained, also links to climate change? Because I think we've started to think more there in the past year with things like the Pay Up campaign. And I think of course, Black Lives Matter and how all
Mhm.
of that sort of come in terms of climate justice. But I'd love to hear it from you.
So, one analogy that I've been doing a lot lately, and I think that this one's really like, it always takes my breath away, but we live in a world that is unfair, and it's unfair as in people don't have the things that I believe are human rights. Like, a portion of the world does not have clean water, doesn't have access to clean water. And when we look at a lot of the bigger fashion brands and we look at the waste that they're doing, you have to look at all the resources that they're essentially pissing away, basically, by having this linear cycle where they waste 25% of what they produce. So like, the example I use in 2017, H&M said, we have $4 billion worth of unsold stock. It was $4 million, sorry. $4 million worth of unsold stock in 2017. Okay, if H&M paid wholesale $1 for all of those pieces, and I would be willing to bet that that's what they're paying wholesale for a lot of their clothing, if not less than that, we're ultimately looking at 4 million unsold pieces. Now, say that like all of those pieces are t-shirts and jeans. Now, I know recently there was a report that came out about water usage in cotton, and so it's debatable. Nobody really, I think the research isn't where it should be for a lot of this stuff, but it used to be that people would say it was 5,000 liters of water to make a t-shirt and jeans. So let's just run with that, okay? If H&M has, basically trashed 4 million garments and they're all t-shirts and jeans, and we know that water goes into this process, and we live in a world where there's already water insecurity, and then we go into climate crisis where there will be water wars. Who is responsible? How many gallons of water just got wasted because they believe that the earth's resources are theirs to waste?
Yeah, well, I won't test you on your maths there, but I
Don't, because I'm really bad and I'm really tired. You won't get the accurate amount.
I totally get your point, and I think it's really interesting because what you've done already. One of my questions was going to be around what we can all do as consumers, but what I think you've really set out for us is that this isn't on the individual.
Yeah.
Actually,
although we should buy less. Like, let's be honest. Like, if people in wealthy countries, 68 items a year, we got to stop that crap. It's not good.
But it's not enough.
Yeah. Right? No, it's not enough. We need all things. This is the thing. Like, I always get people coming at me going, yeah, this should be on the government. And people are like, this should be on the consumer. No, we need all the things. We actually need a culture shift, which actually pushes our lawmakers to do something. That's really it. The lawmakers will not do anything without the cultural shift. And the cultural shift looks like it not being cool to like buy this much stuff and participate in this cycle in the way we've all been participating, arguably, for the last 20 years. That's the cultural shift. So like, no, the consumer isn't going to make the brands abide by laws. Like, that's not how that's going to work. But we can hit them where it hurts, and that's the pocketbook. If we hit them there, they lose a lot of power to, carry favor with like the politicians, which is something that I think does happen. If there's a business that's thriving and has a really awesome, GDP, and they're doing amazing, they have more power than a lot of the countries that they're producing clothing in. So who's going to regulate them? If the government of Indonesia is afraid to lose all of the business from the brands who are producing in the factories, which are polluting the Chitoram River, who is going to regulate them? It's got to be us making different decisions and going, you know what? I just don't want to buy like this anymore, So it is all things. It really is. We can't have one without the other. People want a have it all sort of world, which is, I think that's a quote that you use about, and I've used that one too, the Council of Concerned Researchers. You don't get this have it all environmentalism where we don't change anything about the way we do things, but these problems magically self-correct. That's never going to happen.
Or a bit of technology will solve
it. That's just never going to happen. We've got to change the culture. We need the regulation, and we need to hold these brands to account, and we also need to tax these billionaires.
Yeah, and then there's tons in there that I want to unpack further, not least the latter point that you just mentioned. But one of the things you just said there in terms of all of us buying less, and that there's a responsibility in us and we can hit them where it hurts in terms of the pocket, the profit piece. One of the pieces I just want to touch on, because I know that you talk about this quite often, and I think it's something I personally don't think is talked about enough within this context of buying less, or indeed producing less. And that's what's been deemed the poor people argument.
Yeah. That old one.
If you're recommending people to stop buying or to buy less, that you're detrimenting those who can only afford to do so. It's it's a human right to have access to this, or it's a democratic right to have access to cheap fashion. And
is it though? I always wonder,
exactly.
Is it a human right to have access to cheap clothing when
it's a sign of
cheap
progress.
Clothing has a cost and someone else pays the cost with the lack of human rights? It's like, I don't understand how people can really repeat that over and over again without unpicking what's behind it. The truth is, these low costs, they don't come from nowhere. Somebody is sacrificing their country's resources. Somebody is not getting paid. Low costs don't just poof appear. And so I think it's time for us all to sort of just get real. And like, I always hear that argument from somebody who is just wanting to defend the system so they can shop without feeling bad about it. And I'm not here to make people feel good about this system. Absolutely. I don't exist for that, but the other part of it is, I feel like on the internet, one person says something and then the other person says it, and then it just becomes the norm. Whether or not it's truthful, that happens. We hear that when people talk about how thrift has become gentrified. Yes, there are more people opening Depop stores, but the fashion industry creates 100 billion garments a year, which is almost 14 times the human population. If 50% of the planet lives on $5.50 a day, then let's just have that. Let's say that, what's the human population? 7.9 billion people. So it's roughly probably about 3 billion people that have any sort of access to participate in the system. So this whole thing about thrift becoming gentrified, there's 100 billion garments. We can't thrift ourselves out of this, So the person that opened the Depop shop and went to the thrift store, they're not robbing you of anything. Your thrift store doesn't suck because of more people buying secondhand. It sucks because fast fashion is low quality and making your thrift store sucky. That's really it. There's less quality stuff. And that is not the fault of the person who's getting a little side hustle off of this problem. That's the fault of us not having enough good quality clothing circulating in the secondhand market. But that's one that I hear repeated again and again. I'm just we need to put this one to rest, because it's just not cute. And also poor people, you're classist if you critique the system. Another thing I definitely researched when going into the book, right? America, second biggest fast fashion consumer. China's the first, but that's only because their population is that much bigger than America. Per head, America is king when it comes to shopping. We are doing the damage. Calls are coming from inside the house. So I researched, the wealth of America, and I found with the different class systems, poor and working poor people and working class people in America account for 3% of America's wealth. Right. 3%. The poor and working poor people are not the people that are buying 68 garments a year. They are not the people that are sustaining the system in a way where it's turning profit. That money is coming from other people with disposable income. And I think people need to realize, are you defending the system, or do you actually do you actually care? Or are you just I just want to shop and not feel bad about it? Because I have a lot more respect for people that are just I just want to buy clothing. Stop telling me these facts, at least that's honest. But sure. Then the next question I always ask people is okay, well, we should raise wages for everyone. And then they never want to get in that conversation. That's where the poverty activism stops, is when I say no, well, if everyone made a living wage, then we'd all have more choice. And the truth of the matter is, somebody who is poor, working poor, probably doesn't want to buy disposable clothing that's going to fall apart. That actually traps people in a loop where, the Terry Pratchett boots analogy, which I also talk about in the book, it's a quote about a character who he can buy one pair of boots that costs this amount of money, they only last a few months, or he can spend this amount of money on the boots that will last him many years, but then he can't pay for his other bills. And so he is in this loop of buying the $20 boots because he can't get out of the loop. So I would argue that nobody actually wants to buy disposable clothing. Let's stop defending the system. And if you want to end poverty, then join the fight to raise wages for everyone so that all of us can actually choose to, like, buy clothing that we feel no one was exploited by. But that's where it drops off. That's when I know it's someone just defending their consumerism, because that part of the conversation, people are always like, yeah, well, good luck with that,
Well, but as you say, this, it's how they all, it proves how they are all interconnected.
They're all interconnected. And the truth is, raising wages would be so good for everyone, from garment workers to, people like me in my 20s. The truth is, I think there's a part of, like, my generation that participates in these systems because the world is actually quite unaffordable for us as well. The gap between the super wealthy and the middle class person is larger than it's ever been. It's an ocean. And so I do see my generation participating in consumerism because the things that we would like to buy, the things that make us feel like we are whole, that make us feel like this is what you do when you get to this age, are completely inaccessible.
Yeah.
Housing has gone up. There are so many things that have gone up with inflation, yet wages have stagnated. So housing, cars, education, all of that stuff, completely unaffordable. But meanwhile, the cost of clothing has gone down, and that's because it is artificially depressed because of exploitation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think my question to you then is, like, when you look at this, given all of those things that you've just said, and you gave one solution, which is around living wages, but if you were to look at it from that sort of big picture standpoint, what do you wish to see change more than anything? Like, I know there's no silver bullet, but if you could sort of paint a picture of what you would want to see evolve, I mean, is it that wealth divide that you've just mentioned?
Definitely the wealth divide. I wish that more people would get really active in these conversations about the wealth divide, and, realizing that if, like, a brand says that they can't guarantee that the people that made their clothing was paid a living wage, then, like, maybe that's not a brand that you should feel that comfortable supporting, because the rollout of, like, ooh, we're going to be sustainable by 2050, net zero, blah, 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 blah. But then you're like, can you pay a living wage? And they're like, no, not yet. That's a red flag, So more people being aware and getting involved in, like, civil action when it comes to these topics, is, I think it's very easy to feel jaded and hopeless. Like, we are in a weird time period. We are experiencing climate emergency as we speak, like, it's very easy to be like, yeah, you know what, it's all going to hell in a handbasket, so YOLO. But I think we really have to fight that, because there is still time. My friend Ayana Elizabeth Johnson, who I interviewed for the book, she talks about how the difference between 1 degree and 2 degree, it's worlds apart. And, like, we're not gonna not hit the 1 degree, but the future that we all can imagine, where, we're actually, like, not fire, hell, and brimstone, that's still within our grasp. It's still up for grabs. And so I want people to sort of snap out of the jadedness and start really getting involved, because it's on us, and it's go time.
What do you think's stopping it from happening? Like, truly actually stopping this from being a reality in fashion specifically?
So I think in fashion, I think there's a lot of people that know how the sausage is made, but everyone's afraid of their next job. Like, I actually feel like I am in a very lucky position in the fact that I don't want to work in the fashion industry at all. I don't. I used to want to. I don't anymore, because I don't like what the fashion industry currently is. If you're the person who works for the company that is doing the polluting, I do feel like your hands are tied in this weird way. Like it's very easy to say everyone should stand up, but if you're the breadwinner and you've got kids and you know that bad things are happening, but you also know that you really need this job, how much standing up can you do? And I think that there is still a lot of fear in the fashion industry that like, you're only as good as like you we hear about brands like banning journalists from their fashion shows for like, saying that was ugly or I didn't like that or whatever. So there's still this like intrinsic fear of the industry. And I just don't care because I want nothing to do with its current iterations. I don't care if you don't invite me to the parties or the shows or whatever. I'm going to say what's truthful and honest because that's important to me and I want to live. So I think that's it. I think there's this culture of fear about like being punished and like not being able to work in the industry again. And I think we have to be prepared to let go of that. That's what I tell a lot of like, I talk to students and people will say, how do I fight this? And I feel for people that are in fashion school right now because I think as long as the power remains so top heavy at the top of the food chain, there's very little space for you to make the necessary change that needs to happen within a lot of companies, to be honest.
Yeah.
I don't know if a lot of companies are going to actually change their ways because what I tend to see is a lot of bullshit when it comes to like mainstream fashion. Just like, okay, but like at the root of it, like I will believe a mainstream fashion company when they're just like, you know what? We're going to scale back. We are not going to do that much clothing this year. We're going to change our calendar up. We are going to try and be, waste free. Like we're going to do everything we can to try and really, really just get this process to as streamlined as possible with as little waste as possible. And that means that we're probably not going to be producing as much clothing. But once again, neon pink elephant.
You and me both, waiting for that day. Someone has to do it. It's whether there's somebody that's big enough that will. I mean, it's going to be incredibly interesting to see. And it's so interesting hearing you talk about that journey because I think, we've talked about it before, being on, similar journey of just being like, I don't want to work in, having spent my entire career loving this industry and wanting to be in this industry, then recognizing that actually in its current form, there's absolutely no desire to be there whatsoever. So
no desire. I feel like
in.
You have to carry out things that you probably don't feel that comfortable with. I mean, and I listened to like interviews, with people that used to work within the industry. And I remember this one person saying that like, they remember when like Bangladesh became the manufacturing hub and knowing how wrong it was, knowing that like these factories were being created very quickly with very little regulation and all the brands, all the big high street brands being like, quick, let's move our production. We can pay less money and they can do it. Do they have the labor? Do they have the machinery? I don't care if a child gets their hand chopped off. Let's do it. That's really it. I feel like brands are so good at like talking bullshit, but when it comes down to like actually doing the right thing, it's all about, well, yeah, but can they do it for this price? Which directly doesn't correlate with like anything that they're talking about, how they're going to change things for the best. As long as you're chasing that like cheapest, lowest price possible, you aren't going to change anything really. That's the problem. Hence the race to the bottom. Someone asked in the comments about changing the narrative or planting seeds of cultural change.
I wonder there only because I'm going to get Rosanna to do that part with you at the end.
Cool. Okay.
3 more questions I want to get us through.
Oh, sure.
We've got several others as well. I can see there's loads flying in, which is really exciting. And thank you, Emily, for that one. My question to you, just because you did bring up this idea of, yourself within all of this, and sorry for the background noise here, but yourself and where you've been on this and where you wanting to be in the industry and then not wanting to be. I'd love to just hear a little bit about your own journey within sustainable fashion specifically, not just the fashion industry at large, and how that's been determined by racism, by discrimination, or even perhaps by white privilege, which you also talk about a lot in your book, understandably. And I'd just love to just unpack that a bit and just see how that's shaped the way that you've focused.
Yeah. So sorry. So yeah, I had several experiences within the industry, and I think the worst one was working for a magazine in New York, because I just really began to understand that not just magazines, but fashion as well. It's this whole thing where the unpaid internship has just really turned it so that there are only certain people who can survive in the industry, and you have to come from economically privileged backgrounds. That's really it. It's like by the time I went to New York, I was one, like the oldest intern ever. And I was a lot more savvy than the young people because of that. And I remember talking to like these young people, and this one girl had, this was her fifth internship. The girl that was like the fashion assistant at the time, I was like, how did you get this job? And it was basically, you had to be there when someone left. And if you could do the job, you would get it. It was a right place, right time sort of thing. But she had done numerous internships as well. The fashion internship thing, it is a road to nowhere. It's a bridge to nowhere for most people. And it's bullshit. It's classist bullshit, because the only people that can do that much free labor are already people that are economically privileged. And that's so unfair. It's unfair to have an industry where everyone goes, fashion is for everyone, but we know that the gateways are blocked by these things. You know, it's really it's really, really terrible. And so, yeah, that was my experience in New York. And I remember being like, I don't want to be in this industry because it's not going to be as diverse as I think it is. Even if I manage to make it work, I'm going to be surrounded by people who just are so much more privileged than I am, which that's not a diverse, we run the risk of really creating only a certain class of people who become the cultural makers of our society. And that's really dangerous, you know? And that's the point of Naomi Klein's writes about that in No Logo, that like when you make it so that only those that can give their labor for free to certain corporations are allowed to exist within the corporation, you create the class of who is the cultural maker of our society. And yeah, I hated it. I absolutely hated it. On top of that, it was just incredibly white. It was very, very white. And that's a problem as well. It's, oh, it still is. And then everybody's like, how do we make the fashion industry more diverse? And I'm like, once again, another neon elephant there. Like, but you don't just see that in magazines. If you look at the board of like fast fashion companies, big luxury companies, show me the diversity there, because that's lacking as well. And while I don't believe in trickle down politics, that sort of stuff has a real trickle down effect. You know, like I love it when a company that has a board of 8 white men, it's like, empower her. You know what I mean? Feminism. It's horrible. But then, of course, at the bottom of the food chain, you also have like 80% of garment workers, women, you know, so like there are intersectional issues everywhere you look here, and it's a bit of a dumpster fire.
I love that you've mentioned pink elephants, neon elephants, all of these different versions of
elephants. Magenta elephant, you know.
Can have some leopard print elephants.
Millennial pink elephant.
That sounds okay. You talk in the book about the idea that we should all be constantly learning and growing. Mm-hmm. I think you've already imparted so much knowledge to other people this evening, but what's something that you've learned most recently outside of writing your book?
Does it have to be like fashion related, or does it have to be?
I mean, great.
Well, I mean, if we are going to do sustainable fashion related, and this is like scary, like the soil of our world, we have like a topsoil issue because of the way we've been doing agriculture, you know, and that's pretty terrifying because we actually need soil to grow food. Another thing I learned is that colonialism has changed the flora of our landscape, of our world, basically. So like the cotton plants that you see in America were actually brought over by colonialist settlers. They were not native to America. And when you do enough of that, you change the precious ecosystem that you need to live in. That's what humans have done. We've changed the world. And I mean, fossil fuel industry responsible for most of this, but just things like, changing the geographic landscape of a place so that you can farm more cotton, that has a knock-on effect as well. And so colonialism is definitely tied to the way our climate looks today, because humans have done a lot of messing about with like the precious ecosystem of our planet.
That's the whole challenge. Yeah, absolutely. I have one final question, and then we're going to flip on to the Q&A. We always end our conversations on this one. It's a very straightforward one, which is just an intention to end on a note of optimism, which is, what's your hope for the industry if you were to look ahead, this year?
I hope that we take our jaded attitude, and I hope that we apply it to corporations instead of life. Like, I would love for people to be as critical as some of these corporations as I am. Like, if you have that negative energy, put it somewhere else and be a thorn in a CEO's side. That's what I would love to see. And I do think that we can actually have impact. The thing is, and this is something that I wrote about in the book, Ananya Bhattacharjee says, the consumer voice does actually have power. You hear a lot of people, where they'll see like an action on social media, and it's always the person that's not going to do anything ever that's going to be like, you keyboard warriors, why don't you get out in the street and do something? Then you protest in the street and they're mad about that as well. But the truth of the matter is, even if you push back on what a corporation is saying or doing on social media, if you get enough of your friends in on that, it does actually get addressed behind closed doors. And if there's enough of it happening and they have to talk to shareholders about it, we can actually push change that way as well. There's so many ways to push change, and it's going to look different for different people because we all have different backgrounds, different abilities, that sort of thing. But if one way isn't working for you, find a different way, because your voice has weight and it matters in this conversation. And so, come on in, the water's fine.
Love it. Thank you, Aja. And genuinely, it's been such a pleasure to hear your perspective, hear the words behind the book, behind your Instagram, behind your Patreon, all of these things that I'm very lucky.
By the way, come on in, the water's fine. I think I just took that from Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson. She says that a lot, so I want to credit her with it.
It is a good book as well, yeah. Well, listen, let's open up to questions, and I will then come back at the end to just wrap up with you. So Rosanna, sure. Let me bring you back in, and I will disappear.
That was such a brilliant conversation, and I kept like writing here, and I agree. Like some crazed fan of you both. And we have some really thorough and insightful questions. It's really obvious that our audience has been thinking about everything you've been saying. I'm going to start with Samantha Weir. She has asked our most recent question here: how do we truly move away from our overconsumption habit on a larger scale? Telling people to simply stop shopping when they've grown up with fast fashion and adverts in our face all day is difficult. Is there something we can replace it with? For example, rental, mending, DIY, swapping, or styling? Or are these alternatives just a band-aid?
I think that they're kind of a band-aid, because even though I like the rental market and I think that that's great, I think that we should embrace these sorts of things. The idea that you need a new dress because of the wedding that you're going to, or even I had this recently, like consumerism is hardwired in us. Knowing that it's hardwired in you, I think is important, because that's how you fight it. Recently, book launch, I had a moment where I thought, I'm going to need to go and buy a new dress. And then I laughed at myself, because I'm like, you wrote a book about this. You don't need a new dress. Go to your closet, pick out one of the lovely dresses you already own, put it on your body and go. And it was such a relief. Like, it was like, because my sister was coming over, and I hadn't seen my sister in a year and a half, because I've not seen any of my family because of this. And I was so excited. I thought, oh, I'm going to have to spend an afternoon shopping for a dress with her. Is this really how I want to spend my time when I've not seen her for a year and a half? That was amazing. But I think, just, it was such a relief to be like, this dress is great. I don't know what I was thinking, but I will say that we have to change our culture on a large scale, and that looks like conversation. I don't think that, we're going to change everyone. I don't think that we're going to change everyone, but I do think that if enough people change the way we're doing things and we make it kind of a bit uncool to like participate in constant consumption, that's how I think we get real change. Like, I think really it has to come down to, it has to stop being cool. Like, you know, when that person that like you think is really cool is talking about how much they rewear things, and then that happens in schools. I also think educating in schools, talking about this in schools. Kids don't get any sort of conversation about this, but like consumerism is pernicious, not just in the clothing sector, but like children's toys. I remember when I was a kid.
Rachel and I talk about this all the time. It's despicable.
We can talk about this topic and talk about it not just in clothing, but in kids as well. I mean, and I recognize this as a kid. I remember September 1st, I'd be watching Saturday morning cartoons, and all of a sudden, all the advertisements would be like, pew, 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 here's a bunch of noisy plastic that you don't need, but Christmas is coming, so we're going to market it to you. And I remember thinking as a kid, every year around this time, it just seems like all of a sudden I'm being served ads for toys that I don't really want, but I'm being made to feel like I should want them because it looks fun. And I was questioning this as a kid. And if I had had a conversation with an adult or someone had been like, actually, you're onto something, I think I would have been like, oh, so maybe I don't actually want all this stuff that I feel like it. So changing the culture and how we talk to children about it, that will overlap into the sector, I believe personally. I think that trying to just like replace it with like, you know, rental or swapping, at the end of the day, like you don't need a new outfit for like every activity you do, and that's what we need to actually change. So
yeah, it's very interesting how in the last year the fashion media, the journalists have just jumped and leapt on rental, and because it's such an easy way to still fill
just
fashion.
segue it right in.
So you still need new stuff, but rent it. And
Yeah,
we're going to talk
exactly.
about these rental brands all the time.
You can't be seen in the same dress. You know, if you're going to a wedding. When I was in my 20s, I had a wedding dress. I had a dress that I wore to weddings, and it was a dress that I had spent good money on, but it was a Marnie dress that I wanted when it was on the runway. And then it popped up on Ukes for like 90% off. And I was like 5 seasons later, and I was just like, okay. I wore it to every wedding. And I remember having a moment and being like, right, so you just need one good dress, because it's not like there's much overlap with the people attending these weddings, and nobody cares. And I always get complimented. So I remember having that moment in my 20s where I was like, I am always going to be the person that has one dress that I wear to weddings, because my friendship group is spread out and diverse, but also the person that's going to be like, oh, same dress, that person is just trying to make you feel bad. So having a conversation about this stuff early and often, I think is really important. And I think that's how we change the culture.
The cultural shift. Right. Ismay, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. We make ethically in Britain and strongly believe localism is the future for fashion. Do you think a shift towards onshoring will make consumers more aware on the ethical and environmental impacts of their clothing if it is made on their doorstep? Much of it is out of sight, out of mind.
That's a very, very good thought. Although I do feel like we still have to have that cultural shift, because the rate at which Britain buys fast fashion, I don't think that we have the factories to create that amount of clothing. You know what I mean? Like if everyone was buying from small local British brands, we would still need that cultural shift, because we wouldn't have enough factories and brands to keep that demand going. And so we need to have the cultural shift first and foremost, because I think your price point is probably going to be higher than a lot of the stuff that we see. And people are probably going to be like, oh, I'm not going to pay that when I could buy a $2 t-shirt from Boohoo, you know? So I think cultural shift first, and then, you know, obviously I will always push people to support small business. Like that's a huge part of my platform. But for every person I know that has a small brand, they're still trying to justify their prices to people. And that can be a part of the cultural shift, is people actually understanding that like this is a living wage employer that you're questioning. We want more living wage employers because it actually means that like that area of the world is thriving because we have a living wage employer. That money is going back into that community. Those are conversations that can all be had during that cultural shift that I talk about. But I think for every brand that I consult for, every brand that I know, they're still having to justify paying people living wages. So yeah.
Oh, again, the cultural shift, it all comes back to that, doesn't it?
Yeah, totally.
Roxanne, I feel telling youngsters to stop buying fast fashion or unethical luxury falls on deaf ears most of the time because it's such a deep topic that can't be explained in a sentence. And I know what it's like at that age with fashion. What are some ways to get the youth on board? Should schools be talking about this in a big way, which I know you just mentioned?
Oh,
What
yeah.
are the right ways for them to be doing so without it backfiring? I would really love some guidance, and I am also loving your book Consumed.
Thank you. I am fighting that myself. My niece, she's on social media. She gets sucker punched into these awful brands. And like, I try and fight it myself, but I think schools definitely have a role here. I think that we should push for, more knowledge on not just consumerism, but how things are made in schools. We became this culture where we pushed everyone towards like education, but we got away from like trade. Like I remember, and I talk about this in Consumed, how like, you know, people prized going to university, but like where I was from, nobody really like praised you for becoming a mechanic when like, we need mechanics. That's an awesome job. We need plumbers. That isn't something that we in our society are like, it's amazing that you're, going to become a plumber. We don't do that. And I think it's gone the same way when it comes to like how things are made in garments. Like I talk about how I took home economics when I was a teenager, but it was called like modern teen living. And it was kind of like one of those things that people kind of like thought was a bit of a joke, but that was where I first understood how much labor went into making things. So we would sew things. We made a pin cushion, a pair of really crappy boxers, a pillow, and I knew how much of my labor went into creating that product. And I feel like if we had a little bit more of that in schools, kids would probably question a lot of what they see, because I would argue that that was what had me questioning consumer markets. I would look at, the $20 H&M dress and go, okay, I tried to make something similar and it took me 3 days and it don't look nothing like that. And like, why on earth are they able to charge that price? And so I definitely think that education, if you can give kids the education, they can put the rest together for themselves. Like my niece, for instance, I have two nieces, one over here who I fight with the fast fashion, and then my niece Avery in the US, who's a lot more, we're on the same team with this stuff. And my sister had bought one of my collab sweaters with Laura Jean. And when it arrived, Avery saw the, what is it called? The thing that comes with it, the receipt, not the receipt, but
The invoice?
The invoice. She saw the invoice and she called me and she was so excited because she saw the price tag. She said, oh my God, Aja, your sweater cost $100. I was like, actually, that's pounds. And she really thought in her head that I was getting all of that money.
Oh, wow, yes.
Because she doesn't understand how things are made.
Yeah.
So I had a great conversation with her where I was like, your niece, your auntie is not rich. I am not making 100 pounds per sweater. Here's how things are made. We buy yarn from this maker. They are an ethical, sustainable yarn maker. We pay X amount of money for that. That's a big chunk of money. Our garment workers, because I didn't make that sweater. I'm a collaborator in it. I didn't design it. Laura's the designer. I collaborate. Like, she's amazing. I couldn't design that. So our knitwear makers, who do the bulk of the heavy lifting, they get the biggest chunk. And then shipping and taxes are this amount of money. And then packaging is this. And then Aja and Laura split this amount of money. And once she understood that, she was like, okay, but like everyone has to get paid fairly. And I was like, yes, exactly. And then her next question was, why is everything so cheap at the mall? And I was like, here's where I ruined your childhood, kiddo, you know, but like she could put those pieces together once she actually understood what was happening behind the scenes. So like, I know I sound like a broken record, but education is going to be the key to like this cultural shift and like raising empathetic children, you know?
Right. I'm so aware of time. There is in the chat has been really active, as I'm sure you've seen. And there is one question that came in at the beginning that then a lot of people have replied to. And I know that you mentioned it earlier when you were talking to Rachel. So I'm going to end with this. And I'm sorry if we haven't had a chance to answer everyone's questions. So it came from Amelie Lambert. Thank you for such an insightful conversation about changing the narrative or planting the seeds of cultural change. I wonder, say if you're at an event or a party with people not at all aware or seemingly not interested in these issues, what might have been your most successful approach thus far? What in your experience sticks with and engages people the most?
So people always ask me what I do, and like depending on how much energy I have, I either say I'm a writer or I'm an influencer. I don't really lead with influencer because I don't get paid for my Instagram much. I get paid a little bit, but not enough to live off of. And so I sometimes will, like, if it's someone who has like no interest at all in the topic, I'll lead with I'm an influencer because they'll sort of be like, oh, wow, who do you work with? What brands do you get for free? Da, 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 da. And then the next question, I'm like, the next conversation, I'm like, no, I'm like an anti-consumption influencer. They're like, well, what does that entail? And I'm like, it involves telling people about the fashion industry and what they're doing. And so I try and feel out who the person is and then craft the narrative around what I think they're interested in taking in. Some people will be like, you know, sort of on the outskirts of the conversation. But then if you sort of lead with, I've got a social media platform, this is what I talk about, you can bring them in. But I never like, you know, will show up to someone and be like, is that from Boohoo? Oh, do you know what they did? You know, because nobody really likes that person. Instead, I let people come to me, and some people are not at all going to be reciprocal to the conversation. Those are the people where I'm generally like, okay, you know what? I run a website. Sometimes I say that as well. I've got a litany of like different occupations I use for like cocktail parties. But if someone sounds like they might be interested in this topic, I sort of start with like, this is what my platform's about, this is what I talk about, and sort of give them a few nuggets and see if they'll come into the conversation. But I recognize that not everyone is just, some people just don't give a shit. And like for the people that don't care, I'm not going to waste my time like being like, here's why you should care about your clothing, because they're just going to like call you sanctimonious, you know? And I would rather spend my time talking to the people that are already there, you know, like there are some people that are dipping their toe in the water. They just need a little bit of push, and feel out who that person is, because otherwise you're just like screaming in the wind, you know, and like that's a waste of your energy. And like there are so many people that are going to meet you halfway, but if you feel that that person isn't actually going to try and meet you halfway and they're just going to be like combative, like give up. Spend your time with someone who gets it, because eventually the person that won't meet you halfway will eventually find that they're completely outnumbered because nobody really wants to participate that way, and then they come along. But like I'm not going to be the person that's going to get their snarky comments first. Like I'd rather just talk to people who can meet me where I'm at.
And actually, that's the joy of IRL events that Amelie mentioned, that you can judge somebody when you're talking to them through, you know, their facial expressions or their body language, unlike on social media where
life is short. Do not waste your energy. Like there are 7.9 billion humans on this planet. And out of those 7.9 billion, I bet you there's at least 500,000 that would talk to you about this topic, and you're probably not even going to get to meet them all. So I'd rather seek those people out so you can like collaborate and feed and have that good energy than like try and convince some jerk who's just being obstinate because they're not trying to like, you know, really think too deeply about this stuff.
Perfectly put. Everybody, thank you for your questions, and do have a look through the chat, Aja. It's there's so much being said there, and I'm sure
I follow along. I always follow
good.
along when we're having these conversations. So thank you everyone for coming and attending. Really appreciate it.
Oh, good. Okay, I'm going to hand back to Rachel. Thank you all.
Fantastic questions. Wow, those were absolutely amazing and so insightful. And I must just say, Aja, you're getting so much praise. There's a lot of people in the audience who have already read your book, which is fantastic. If you haven't, highly recommend it to everyone. I have to say, as somebody that works deep in this industry, it's really such a pleasure to learn. Like, I learned so much from this, Aja. So thank you, because yeah, it feels nice to expand your own knowledge, even when you're already really deep in something. So full credit to you for the volume of research that must have gone into it.
Thank you.
I want to end on our quick fire round, our little bit of fun to wrap up.
Let's do it.
I feel like I could have made these even more interesting now, having had the conversation, but we're going to wing it. Okay, so secondhand or small responsible business?
Oh, I have both. That's not fair. Like asking a mom to pick a favorite child. I go with small sustainable business because often secondhand clothing, if I find something that fits me as a plus size person, it's a real winning day. I have a better chance with the small sustainable business getting something made to order that's going to fit me. Awesome. So
totally fair. All for that as well. Instagram or Patreon?
Patreon, I tend to have people that are really trying to engage with this stuff. And so I feel like the conversations in the comments are like shit hot.
Nice, love it. Similar vibe. Instagram live or real life event?
Real life event. Oh my goodness. Like meeting people, it's amazing. The energy and just like the joy and I also think it's people sometimes will be completely like misconstruing like what you're trying to do or say sometimes on the internet, but in real life they get it, you know?
Totally. Death of fast fashion or reimagined fast fashion?
Death.
That one was a bit of a trick one. I knew your answer. Business change or policy change?
Policy change, because I don't think the businesses can be trusted at this point. They've had a long time to get it together, you know, and it's just like, I under capitalism, corporations can only really act in their own best interest. So like, if the planet is standing between a profit margin, the profit margin will be picked. Policy.
Yeah. Policy needed to lead to that business change, I guess. London or Washington?
London.
Oh, okay.
Home.
You've been here a long time now. 2021 or 2031?
Oh, ask me after COP26.
That's fair. Yeah, I'm on the same page on that front. It's a very fair point. Well, listen, thank you so much for spending so much time with us this evening. We so appreciate this. Has been phenomenally insightful. Thank you to everyone in our audience for being here. Thank you to our sponsor Klaviyo for making this happen. And Aja, we look forward to seeing you in real life next time.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, everyone. And if you do have a chance to check out the Slow Factory, please do. They do free classes. They're amazing. And if you value the information they're giving you, hit them up with a donation because they're pretty cool.
Yeah, totally. Please do so directly. Equally, our Eventbrite is also still open. 100% goes to Slow Factory as well. So you can also donate there. We've had a phenomenal amount of donations for this evening, which is really wonderful. Yes. And we'll be taking lots more. So yeah.
Good job, team. Thank you for having me, everyone. Have a good night.
Bye.
Bye.